15 years. That's a significant chunk of a person's life, and every single one of those years, I'd poured into GlobalTech innovations. I'd started as a junior account manager, fresh out of college with more enthusiasm than experience, and climbed my way up to senior account lead. I'd seen the company through thick and thin, celebrated the wins, and weathered the storms. So when the email landed in my inbox that Tuesday afternoon, it felt less like a message and more like a punch to the gut. The office hummed around me, the usual symphony of keyboard clicks and muffled phone conversations. I'd just finished a call with Ms. Albright, a client who'd been with us for over a decade. She always said I was the only one who truly understood her company's needs. That kind of loyalty, built over years of trust, was something I took immense pride in. Then I saw the subject line, Organizational Update. Richard Harding, our boss and the CEO, was notorious for these vague, self-important memos. Usually, they were filled with corporate jargon about synergy and streamlining, things that sounded impressive but rarely meant much. I clicked it open, expecting the usual fluff. Instead, I was met with cold, hard words. Due to reorganization, your position is eliminated effective immediately. Regards, Richard. 15 years. Reduced to 13 words and a digital signature. No warning, no phone call, not even a thank you for my dedication. I sat there, staring at the screen, the words blurring in front of my eyes. Senior account lead. Gone. Effective immediately. I was 42, not some fresh-faced kid just starting out. I'd practically built half of GlobalTech's client base from the ground up. And just like that, I was erased. I leaned back in my worn office chair, the leather groaning beneath me, and tried to let it sink in. The office noise continued, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred in my world. Phones rang, someone down the hall laughed a little too loudly. It felt like I'd been plucked out of the normal flow of time. My gaze drifted to my desk, a stack of files I'd been prepping for next week's presentations. A framed photo of me and my old dog, Max, from before he passed. 15 years of late nights, skipped weekends, and deals I'd fought tooth and nail to close. For what? Reorganization? Everything okay, David? Sarah's voice cut through my stunned silence. She worked 2 cubicles over and had an uncanny ability to sense when something was off. I guess my face was broadcasting my shock. Yeah, just wrapping up, I lied, forcing a weak smile. No point in spilling the news just yet. I'd tell her later, maybe, if I could manage to swallow the lump of humiliation that was rising in my throat. I started to pack my meager belongings. Just the photo of Max, a few pens, and a worn notebook filled with years of client quirks. Ms. Albright preferred 2 sugars in her coffee. Mr. Chen hated small talk. Little details that had kept them loyal all these years. As I slid the notebook into my bag, Ethan sauntered over, a smug grin plastered across his annoyingly youthful face. He was the new golden boy, barely 25, with perfectly gelled hair and an air of cheap confidence that grated on my nerves. Richard had hired him a month ago, part of some fresh blood initiative. "Goodbye, old-timer," Ethan said, his smirk widening. "Time for the young guns to take over." I looked up at him, his casual cruelty igniting a flicker of anger in my chest. I could have retorted, reminded him that I'd closed more deals in a year than he'd probably manage in his entire career. But what was the point? He'd learned soon enough. Instead, I zipped my bag, stood up, and said, "Thank you all for the opportunity." My voice was calm, steady, like I was leaving a routine meeting, not my entire career. Ethan blinked, clearly thrown off by my lack of fight. But I was already walking past him, past Sarah, who shot me a worried glance I didn't meet, past the break room where I'd spent countless lunch hours, and out the glass doors towards the elevator. My reflection stared back at me, a few more gray hairs at the temples, tired lines around the eyes, but a jaw still set with a stubborn resolve. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. Back in my apartment, the silence was deafening. It usually had a comforting quality, but tonight it felt heavy, amplifying the turmoil in my head. I dropped my bag on the kitchen counter with a dull thud and poured myself a glass of water, but my hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. My mind was a whirlwind of disbelief, anger, and a gnawing sense of betrayal. I pulled up the email again on my phone, rereading those 13 words until they swam before my eyes. Due to reorganization. It felt so impersonal, so dismissive. Richard hadn't even bothered to mention severance, just effective immediately, like I was a line item to be casually deleted from a spreadsheet. My thoughts drifted back to the early days of GlobalTech. It was just a scrappy startup then, fueled by late nights and a shared belief in our potential. I remembered staying late countless times, crafting pitches, charming clients that Richard couldn't quite connect with. I'd trusted him, believed in the "we're a family here" mantra he used to throw around so casually. What a joke that turned out to be. I opened my laptop, the screen illuminating the dim living room, and pulled up my resume. It was definitely showing its age, last updated maybe 5 years ago. But the bones were solid. 15 years of tangible results, a long list of clients who'd stuck with me through mergers, recessions, and even Richard's occasional ego trips. I started typing, updating job titles, adding concrete numbers. Last year alone, I'd brought in over $5 million in revenue. Just as I was hitting the save button, my phone buzzed. Richard Harding's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the answer button. But I just couldn't bring myself to talk to him yet. I let it ring out, watching the missed call notification pop up. He didn't leave a voicemail, and frankly, I wasn't in the mood to hear his voice, dripping with insincere apologies or some fabricated explanation. Instead, I fired off my updated resume to 3 key contacts. First, Brenda, a headhunter I'd met at an industry conference a few years back. She always seemed to have her finger on the pulse of the market. Second, Olivia, the VP at Synergy Solutions, a competitor I'd always respected. She'd tried to poach me once, and I'd politely declined, but now the circumstances were drastically different. And finally, Mark Olson, a client I'd worked with for 8 years. He'd hinted a few times that if I ever left GlobalTech, he'd be interested in discussing some independent consulting work. I leaned back on the couch, the glass of water still untouched on the coffee table, and let the weight of the day settle over me. Fired at 42, with no warning, and a smug kid practically kicking me out the door. It stung. God, it stung. But as I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, a different feeling began to bubble up. Not defeat, but something akin to defiance. I wasn't broken. I'd built something substantial at GlobalTech, something bigger than Richard Harding seemed to realize, and I knew with a growing certainty that I could build again. My phone buzzed again. Richard, round 2. I silenced it without even looking at the screen and stared up at the ceiling. Tomorrow, I'd figure out my next step. Tonight, I just needed to breathe. But as I lay there, a question began to nag at me, a seed of anticipation taking root in my mind. What happens when the guy who fires you suddenly realizes he's the one who screwed up? I woke up to the insistent buzzing of my phone. 7 missed calls. 7. All from Richard. The first one had come at 8:03 a.m., and the last at 10:42. My phone screen looked like a scoreboard of his escalating panic. I swiped them away without listening to the voicemails. Not yet. I'd been fired less than 24 hours ago, and whatever emergency Richard thought he had could wait. I shuffled into the kitchen, the familiar ritual of brewing coffee offering a small sense of normalcy. As the rich aroma filled the air, I sat down at the counter with my laptop. The plan was simple: sift through any job offers that might have already trickled in, and start mapping out my next move. There was no time for wallowing. 15 years at GlobalTech had taught me how to pivot, how to adapt to unexpected changes. I wasn't about to start doubting myself now. By 9:30 a.m., my inbox held 3 promising replies. Brenda, the headhunter, had already responded, saying she had a couple of firms in mind and would be reaching out with introductions by noon. Olivia from Synergy Solutions, a competitor I'd always held in high regard, had sent a concise one-liner: "Lunch tomorrow, we need to talk." That definitely piqued my interest. And then there was Mark Olson, the client I'd worked with for 8 years. His email was warm and direct. David, heard you're free. Let's discuss something independent. Call me. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee, letting the possibilities sink in. Double my old salary and a senior role with Synergy? The freedom and potential of my own gig with Mark's backing? For the first time since that dreaded email had landed, I felt the ground begin to steady beneath me. A small smile played on my lips. Then, my phone buzzed again. Richard, 8th call. I smirked and hit the mute button. Let him stew. I'd given him 15 years of unwavering loyalty, and he'd repaid me with 13 words and a kick out the door. If he thought I'd come running back the moment he snapped his fingers, he'd clearly forgotten who I was. Instead of answering, I opened a new spreadsheet. Time to get organized. I started jotting down the pros and cons of each potential path. Synergy offered stability, a ready-made team, and the allure of a corner office. Mark's idea was more of a risk, venturing into the unknown world of freelance work. No safety net, but total control. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. I was halfway through listing the potential downsides of going solo: inconsistent income, the burden of finding new clients, when my phone lit up with a text message. David, call me urgent. Richard again. I sighed and dismissed the notification, my fingers continuing to fly across the keyboard. Around 11 o'clock a.m., another text came through, this time from Sarah. You okay? Office is a mess today. I frowned, my thumbs hovering over the screen. A mess? I'd figured GlobalTech would feel my absence. Someone would have to pick up my accounts, deal with the ongoing projects. But mess sounded bigger. What's going on? I shot back, my curiosity getting the better of me. Her reply came almost instantly. Clients bailing like crazy. All asking for you. I stared at the words, my coffee suddenly gone cold in my hand. Clients bailing? Asking for me? A slow, almost incredulous grin began to spread across my face. I hadn't expected this. Not so soon. This was unexpected. I didn't hesitate. I flipped open my work email on my laptop. It was still active, which was either sloppy on their part or a sign of the chaos Sarah described. What I found was exactly that. Chaos, laid out in black and white. Subject lines screamed with urgency and finality. Contract termination notice. Requesting confirmation of your status. Moving our business elsewhere. These were from clients I'd known for years, some even before Richard had taken over as CEO. I clicked open an email from Ms. Albright. David, she wrote, her usual polite tone replaced with something akin to outrage. I just heard you're gone. You're the only one we trusted at GlobalTech. Consider our contract terminated, effective immediately. We're already in talks with Synergy. My jaw dropped. Synergy? Olivia was moving fast. Another email, this one short and sharp from Mr. Chen. No David, no deal, canceling all projects. Good luck. His directness was typical, but the finality stung. I scrolled through the inbox, a growing sense of disbelief washing over me. There were 38 emails in total, 38 cancellations, all echoing the same sentiment. I'd been their anchor at GlobalTech, the consistent point of contact, the one who understood their needs. And without me, they were cutting ties. Not with GlobalTech, but with the company that had just so carelessly discarded me. I leaned back in my chair, a laugh bubbling up from my chest. It wasn't a joyful laugh, more of a surprised, almost hysterical sound. Richard's precious reorganization had just spectacularly blown up in his face. He'd thought he could just eliminate a senior role and everything would continue as normal. He'd completely underestimated the value of the relationships I'd cultivated over the years. Birthday phone calls, late-night fixes when their projects went sideways, always going the extra mile. They hadn't trusted GlobalTech, they'd trusted me. And now, Richard was finding out the hard way. My phone buzzed again. Richard's 9th call. This time, he'd finally left a voicemail. Curiosity, mixed with a healthy dose of schadenfreude, got the better of me. I clicked play. David, it's Richard. We need to talk. Call me back now. His voice was tight, clipped, completely devoid of the smug drawl he usually paraded around the office with. There was a tremor of desperation in his tone that was almost satisfying. I deleted the voicemail without a second thought and poured myself another cup of coffee. By noon, the offers kept rolling in. Olivia from Synergy called, upping the ante. Double my salary was just the starting point. She was now talking about a significant equity stake and the opportunity to build my own team. Then Mark Olson called, his voice crackling with excitement. David, I've got 3 other clients lined up, ready to sign with you if you go solo. They'd rather work with you than anyone else at GlobalTech. I jotted down the details, my spreadsheet growing with each new possibility. I wasn't just in demand, I was a hot commodity. Richard called again, 10th time. I let it ring, picturing him pacing his corner office, barking orders at poor Ethan, trying to get the clueless kid to fix a situation he couldn't even begin to understand. A few minutes later, Sarah texted again. Richard's losing it, keeps asking where you are. I think he's about to have a meltdown. I typed back a quick reply. Tell him I'm busy moving on. She responded with a thumbs up emoji and I chuckled. Sarah had always had my back, quietly, in her own way. I wondered if she'd known this would happen, if she'd seen what Richard hadn't, that I wasn't just a name on a payroll. Mid-afternoon, I took a break from staring at my laptop screen, my gaze drifting out the window at nothing in particular. The sheer scale of the client cancellations was still sinking in. It wasn't just about getting back at Richard. It was a powerful validation. 15 years hadn't been wasted. I'd built something real. Something that Richard couldn't simply replace with a fresh-faced kid like Ethan or a meaningless buzzword like reorganization. My phone buzzed. 11th call from Richard. Another voicemail. I reluctantly played it. David, it's Richard. Listen, this is serious. Clients are dropping like flies. Name your price to come back. Whatever you want. Just call me. The desperation was palpable, seeping through every strained word. I deleted it without a second thought. There was no price he could offer. Not anymore. I had a promising offer on the table from Synergy, Mark's independent venture waiting in the wings, and a fire in my gut I hadn't felt in years. Richard thought he'd cut me loose, but he'd inadvertently cut his own throat. And me? I was already climbing. The only question left was how high I'd go and how hard GlobalTech would fall. 3 days after Richard's email had turned my life upside down, I found myself in a quiet coffee shop across town, staring at a napkin where I'd hastily scribbled down my future possibilities. Olivia from Synergy had called again, sweetening the deal even further. Double my old salary was now a given, along with a significant equity stake and the chance to build and lead my own team. Mark Olson had called twice, enthusiastically pushing his freelance pitch, assuring me that 3 other major clients were already lined up, ready to follow me if I decided to strike out on my own. 2 distinct paths lay before me, one safe and structured, the other bold and independent. I'd spent 15 years playing it safe at GlobalTech, and look where that had gotten me, fired by a guy who couldn't even spell the word loyalty. I sipped my black and bitter coffee, wondering which version of David Miller I wanted to be now. My phone remained blessedly silent that morning, a welcome relief after Richard's relentless barrage of calls. 11 voicemails in total, each one more frantic than the last. I hadn't returned a single one. He'd made his choice, and now I was making mine. An hour ago, Sarah had texted, "GlobalTech's bleeding. Richard's like a ghost. You okay?" I'd replied with a simple, "Better than ever." In a matter of days, the client exodus, 38 cancellations and counting, had completely flipped the script. I wasn't just the guy desperately searching for a new job anymore. I was the guy everyone wanted. The meeting with Olivia from Synergy was set for noon. She'd chosen a spot downtown, a neutral ground. I arrived early, sliding into a quiet booth with my napkin of notes. She walked in 10 minutes later, sharp suit, even sharper smile, and got straight to the point. "David, we've watched you for years. GlobalTech was punching above its weight entirely because of you. We want you at Synergy. Senior director, equity stake, your own team. Start Monday if you're in. She slid a thick folder across the table. The contract. The numbers were staggering. Double my salary was just the beginning. Stock options, a bonus structure that made my head spin. I kept my expression neutral, flipping through the pages, but inside, I was buzzing. This was the kind of offer you didn't just consider. You grabbed it with both hands. Monday's fast, I said, testing the waters. We can make it work, she replied, leaning forward, her eyes intense. You're worth it. GlobalTech is imploding without you. Trade blogs are already sniffing around. We'd rather have you building with us than picking up their pieces. I nodded, letting her words sink in. She was right about GlobalTech. Sarah's updates painted a grim picture. Empty desks, canceled meetings, Richard dodging the board. I'd built their client trust brick by brick, and now they were discovering it didn't transfer to Ethan or anyone else. Olivia's offer was a lifeline, a rocket boost. But as I folded the contract into my bag, Mark Olson's voice echoed in my head. Go solo, David. We'll back you. Freedom versus structure. The internal tug-of-war was intense. I told Olivia I'd think it over and left, my mind a whirlwind of possibilities. That night, I decided to hit an industry mixer. Part networking, part sheer curiosity. I'd thrown on a new suit, one I'd bought after the firing, a small act of defiance and a symbol of my newfound freedom. Walking into the crowded ballroom, I felt a strange mix of nervousness and exhilaration, like a man with options, which for the first time in a long time, I actually was. Heads turned as I made my way to the bar. I caught snippets of hushed conversations. That's Miller. David Miller. GlobalTech's golden boy, or at least he was. Heard he's the reason they're tanking. I grabbed a drink and mingled, fielding curious questions with a casual shrug. Just exploring what's next, I'd say, keeping my cards close to my chest. Then I saw him. Richard. He looked disheveled, his tie loosened, his eyes wide and frantic. He spotted me too and immediately beelined in my direction, cornering me by the bar. David, buddy, he started, the forced warmth in his voice sounding incredibly fake. We need to talk. No, Richard, we don't, I said, taking a slow sip of my drink, my gaze unwavering. He flinched at my tone, the casual dismissal clearly unexpected. Look, I messed up, he pressed, his voice low and urgent. This whole reorganization thing. It wasn't personal, you have to believe me, but the clients, they're gone, David. The board is breathing down my neck. Come back. Double your pay, corner office, whatever you want. Name it. I set my glass down on the bar, meeting his desperate gaze. 15 years of his bluster and broken promises flashed through my mind. The missed raises, the empty assurances, and then that cold, impersonal email. You didn't just fire me, Richard, I said, my voice slow and clear. You fired trust. And my clients knew that. That's why they left. I'm not your fix. His jaw tightened, a vein pulsing visibly in his neck. You're making a mistake, David. You think Synergy or whoever else is chasing you cares about you like we do? They don't. They don't have to care like you think they do, I shot back, my voice rising slightly. They just have to value me. Something you never did. I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, a man drowning in his own mess. I could feel the eyes of other attendees on us, heads swiveling to follow my departure. I didn't care. I'd said my piece. Outside, I leaned against the cool brick wall of the building, the night air a welcome contrast to the stuffy ballroom. My phone buzzed. Sarah, one of my old GlobalTech clients. David, it's me, she said when I picked up. Heard you're free? I'm officially out of my contract with GlobalTech. Done. Tell me you're starting your own thing. I'd sign with you tomorrow. I laughed, a genuine, heartfelt sound. Mark said the same thing. Well, don't think too long, she said, her voice firm. You're the best I've worked with, David. GlobalTech is nothing without you. We hung up, and I stood there for a moment, the pieces clicking into place. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was Sarah, my colleague from GlobalTech. David? Richard's toast? Board's meeting tomorrow. Also, heard I might have tipped off a few clients about you leaving. Didn't mean to start a war. I stared at the screen, floored. Sarah? Quiet, steady Sarah? She'd lit the match. I texted back immediately. You're a legend. Drinks on me soon. She'd seen my worth, seen the injustice of what had happened, and in her own subtle way, she'd kicked over the first domino. I walked towards my car, Synergy's contract still in my bag, Sarah and Mark's offers ringing in my ears. Richard's desperate plea felt hollow against Olivia's confidence and Sarah's unexpected loyalty. I wasn't just at a crossroads. I was the crossroads. GlobalTech was crumbling, and I was rising. The only question left was which path I'd ultimately take. By morning, I'd know. But that night, I slept better than I had in years, dreaming of a future I'd build, not borrow.